My brother called me at 6 in the morning. Dad passed away in the night, he said, his voice carrying that practiced wobble people use when they want to sound broken but really feel relieved. The service is Wednesday at Calvary Baptist. He left everything to me, Serena, the shop, the house, all of it. Don't come back, you'll only make things worse. I held the phone away from my ear and looked across the small kitchen table at my father. He was dunking a piece of toast into his coffee, squinting at the crossword puzzle in his lap, completely alive and mildly annoyed that I had interrupted his morning routine to take a phone call. I put the phone back to my ear. "Okay," I said. My voice was flat, controlled. "I understand." My brother let out a long breath, the sound of a man unclipping a heavy backpack. "Good," he said. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable." I hung up before he could say anything else. My father looked up from his crossword. "Who was that?" I set my phone face down on the table. "That was your son," I said. "Apparently, you died last night." My father stared at me for a long moment, then he looked down at his toast. "Well," he said, "I wish someone had told me. I would have slept in. My name is Serena, and at 31 years old, I work as a tax compliance auditor for a regional accounting firm in Charlotte. I spend my days finding the money people try to hide from the government: unreported income, phantom deductions, shell companies dressed up in respectable names. I am not a lawyer, I am not law enforcement, but I know how paper lies, and I know how to make paper tell the truth. Nothing in my career, though, had prepared me for the moment I would need to use those skills on my own family. 6 weeks before that phone call, my father had a mild stroke. He was 67 years old and had run our family's pie shop on Dearborn Street in Columbus for 32 years. The shop was called Daddy Ray's, and it was the kind of place that had a line out the door on Sunday mornings and a waiting list for Thanksgiving orders that people put their names on in August. My father had built it from nothing, starting with a single display case and a recipe for sweet potato pie that had belonged to his mother. Over 3 decades, he had turned it into a small institution. When the stroke happened, I was on a work assignment in Nashville. My brother Derek called me then too, and his voice had been different that time, sharp, urgent, genuinely scared. I drove back to Columbus the same night. Dad recovered well. The neurologist said it was a warning, not a catastrophe. He needed 3 to 4 months of inpatient rehabilitation to fully restore his speech and the strength in his left hand. I found a facility called Meadowbrook Recovery Center on the east side of the city, checked his insurance, reviewed their medical staff credentials, and helped him get settled in. What I did not do was tell Derek which facility I had chosen. Derek was 49 years older than me, and had spent most of his adult life orbiting our father's success without contributing to it. He had a talent for standing near good things and implying he had built them. He worked part-time doing bookkeeping for a car wash his wife Nicole's family owned, and he had borrowed money from our father at least 4 times in the past decade, always with a detailed repayment plan that he abandoned within 60 days. I loved my brother in the way you love a scar. It is part of you. It is old, but pressing on it still hurts. 3 weeks into Dad's rehabilitation, I had to return to Nashville to finish my assignment. I kissed my father on the forehead, told him I would be back in 10 days, and made a quiet decision. I left Meadowbrook's name off my out-of-office message. I left it off my calls with Derek. When he asked where Dad was, I told him he was doing well, and that the doctors wanted limited visitors during the early recovery phase. Derek accepted this the way he accepted most inconvenient truths, impatiently and then not at all. What I did not realize was how quickly he had moved in my absence. After the phone call that morning, I sat with my father and explained everything Derek had said. My father listened without interrupting, which was not like him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me one question. "The shop," he said. "Is it still mine?" I opened my laptop. It took me 40 minutes to find the answer, and it was the kind of answer that makes your hands go cold even in a warm room. Derek had filed a durable power of attorney 6 weeks ago, 2 days after Dad's stroke, while our father was still in the acute care wing of Columbus General and could barely lift a pen. The signature on the document was a shaky, uncertain scrawl that looked nothing like the firm, looping signature my father had used his entire life. I pulled up 3 years of Dad's tax returns on my screen and laid them side by side. The discrepancy was obvious. Someone had guided a barely conscious man's hand across a page and called it consent. With that power of attorney, Derek had moved fast. He had listed Daddy Ray's with a commercial real estate broker 5 weeks ago. The sale had closed 11 days ago. The buyer was a restaurant group based in Cincinnati that was converting the space into a smoothie franchise. The sign was probably already up. The display case was probably already gone. He had also filed a notice of sale on the family home on Weston Avenue, the 4-bedroom house my father had owned for 25 years, the house where Derek and I had grown up. That sale was pending, closing in 18 days. And 3 days ago, based on the paperwork I was looking at on the Franklin County Probate Court website, Derek had filed an application to have my father declared legally deceased. The application cited a death certificate from a hospice facility called Grace House. I had never heard of Grace House. Neither had my father. I looked up from the screen. Dad was watching me from across the table. His expression was the same one he used when a supplier tried to charge him twice for the same flour delivery. It was not grief. It was calculation. "How bad?" he asked. I told him everything. The shop, the house, the fake death certificate, the power of attorney, the probate filing. I told him all of it clearly. The way you hand someone a medical diagnosis without softening the numbers. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "I want to go to that service." I nodded slowly. "I thought you might." Wednesday morning arrived the way reckoning always does, bright, warm, indifferent to what it was about to witness. The service was at Calvary Baptist on the north side of Columbus, the same church my father had attended for 40 years, the same church where he had led the collection drive that funded the new fellowship hall roof. The same church where everyone knew his face and his name and his sweet potato pie. I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in my car 2 blocks away. I had spent the previous 48 hours doing what I do best. I had pulled Derek's financial records through every public database available to me. I had documented the power of attorney fraud with a signed affidavit from my father and a notarized comparison of the signature. I had contacted the real estate broker who listed the shop and obtained a full record of the transaction. I had called the probate court and spoken to a clerk who, after I explained the situation quietly and precisely, agreed to flag the deceased declaration as contested pending verification. I had also called my father's attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled his estate planning for 15 years and who said, when I finished explaining, that she had not heard from Derek, that she had not authorized any power of attorney, and that the document filed with the county bore a notary stamp that she was going to verify immediately. I stepped out of the car. The church parking lot was full. The Columbus community had come out to mourn Ray Holloway, the shop owner, the deacon, the man who brought pies to every family in the neighborhood when there was a funeral or a new baby or a job loss. They had come because they loved him. They had come because Derek had sent them a memorial card with a photo of my father smiling behind the counter at Daddy Ray's and a verse from Psalms. Derek was standing at the top of the front steps. He was wearing a dark suit and a grief-stricken expression that did not reach his eyes. Nicole stood beside him in a black dress and a wide-brimmed hat, accepting embraces with the practiced grace of a woman who had been rehearsing this day. They looked like a couple who had finally gotten what they wanted and were being careful not to let it show too much. Derek saw me when I was halfway up the steps. His face went through 3 expressions in under a second: surprise, calculation, anger, and landed on a cold, formal smile. "Serena," he said, "I told you not to come." "I just want to pay my respects," I said. "He is my father." He stepped down to meet me, lowering his voice. "We both know you were never really here for him. You were in Nashville for a month. You didn't even come back when he had the stroke right away. These people know the truth about who showed up and who didn't." The cluster of church members near the door had gone quiet. I could feel their attention on us. The weight of the story Derek had already told them about me. The absent daughter. The career-obsessed one. The one who left Dad alone. I kept my face still. "I just want to see the urn, Derek. Let me say goodbye." He studied me for a moment, looking for the angle, looking for the play. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. "Fine," he said. "But first, you are going to sign this." He held it out. I took it and unfolded it. It was a 1-page document stating that I, Serena Holloway, relinquished all claims to the estate of Raymond Holloway, including any commercial or residential property, and acknowledged Derek Holloway as sole heir and executor. "Sign it and go in," Derek said. "Refuse and I will have you removed. This is a private service and you were not invited." The church members near the door were watching. I recognized Sister Cobb from the choir, and Mr. Aldridge, who had eaten at Daddy Ray's every Friday for 15 years, and Pastor Washington himself, standing just inside the doorway with a careful expression that said he was not sure what he was witnessing. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Derek. Then I reached into my bag and took out my own pen. "If this is what it takes," I said. I signed my name on the line. Derek snatched the paper back and scanned it with the hungry look of a man checking a lottery ticket. A slow smile moved across his face. He stepped aside. "Go ahead," he said. "Say goodbye to Dad." I walked through the doors. The sanctuary smelled of carnations and old wood and candle wax. At the front of the church, on a draped table where a casket might have stood, sat a bronze urn surrounded by white lilies. A framed photo of my father stood beside it, the same one from the memorial card, taken about 2 years ago, him smiling behind the Daddy Ray's counter. He looked happy in that photo. He looked like himself. I sat in the third row and looked at the urn for a long moment, thinking about what was inside it. Sand, maybe, or ash from a fireplace, or simply nothing, an empty vessel purchased for the occasion, because Derek would not have wanted to spend real money on a prop. People filed in around me. The church filled up. Derek and Nicole made their entrance from the side door with the solemnity of royalty, and Derek clasped shoulders and accepted condolences and told a story about Dad's final days that was so detailed and tender that I almost admired the craft of it. When the pastor stepped to the pulpit and invited family to speak, Derek went first. He spoke for 12 minutes. He talked about sacrifice and presence, and what it means to really show up for someone. He talked about sitting with Dad in his final weeks, about holding his hand, about the conversations they had about legacy and love. He talked about how Dad had specifically wanted the shop to pass to him, to keep it in the family name, to carry on the tradition. He looked at me twice during this part. Then the pastor asked if anyone else wished to speak. I walked to the microphone. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when people expect something to go wrong. I could feel Derek's eyes on my back. "Thank you, Derek," I said. "That was a beautiful tribute. It must take a special kind of courage to stand up here and describe a man's final days in such intimate detail, especially when those days never happened." The murmur that went through the congregation was low and uncomfortable. I looked at Derek. "You filed a death certificate from a facility called Grace House." "I called Grace House yesterday. They have no record of our father ever being a patient. I also called the physician listed on the certificate. He retired 4 years ago and his medical license was suspended in 2021. Derek stood up. "Serena." I held up one hand and looked at the back of the church. "Now would be a good time," I said. The double doors opened. My father walked in. He was wearing the charcoal gray suit he saved for Easter and significant occasions. He was moving slowly, using the cane he had been given at Meadowbrook, but his back was straight and his chin was up and the expression on his face was the same one he wore when a health inspector showed up unannounced and he knew every surface in his kitchen was clean. The sound that came out of the congregation was not a scream and not a gasp. It was something between the two, a collective intake of breath that seemed to pull all the air from the room at once. An older woman in the second row grabbed her neighbor's arm. Pastor Washington took 3 steps backward and knocked over a flower arrangement. A deacon in the back row said Jesus Christ out loud into the microphone he was holding, and then immediately apologized. Derek went the color of old concrete. Nicole grabbed his sleeve. She said his name. He did not respond. He was staring at our father the way people stare at things their brain refuses to process. Dad walked down the center aisle. People moved for him the way water moves for a stone dropped into it. Some reached out to touch his arm as he passed, as though confirming the substance of him. He did not stop. He walked all the way to the front of the church and stood in front of the bronze urn and looked at it for a moment with an expression of profound personal offense. Then he picked it up, turned it over, and set it back down upside down. "I believe that is mine," he said, and his voice was steady and dry and entirely his. He looked at Derek. "Sit down, son. We need to talk." Derek did not sit down. His survival instinct, which had always been stronger than his conscience, kicked in before his shock fully cleared. He turned to the two men standing near the side door, large men, church security, and pointed at me. "She did this," Derek said, his voice climbing. "She has been manipulating him. She took him out of his care facility without authorization. He has dementia. He does not know where he is. Ask him what year it is. Ask him what medication he takes." Dad turned to look at his son with an expression I had only seen him use once before, when a supplier tried to sell him week-old fruit at fresh fruit prices. "Raymond Holloway Jr., my father said. Derek flinched. "I take lisinopril for blood pressure and a baby aspirin every morning. The year is current and I am not going to tell you which one because if you do not know, that is your problem. This is my church. Those are my friends." And that he pointed at the urn is a piece of decorative metalwork that does not contain a single molecule of me. Pastor Washington had recovered enough to step forward. He put a hand on Derek's shoulder. "Brother Holloway," he said carefully, "perhaps we should." Derek shrugged him off. "He is not well," Derek said, loudly enough for the room. "She has coached him. She has fed him lines. He cannot make decisions for himself. I have the power of attorney. I am his legal guardian. She kidnapped him from a medical facility, and she is parading him in front of you to manipulate this situation." The room shifted. I saw it happen, the uncertainty moving through the congregation like a cold draft. They wanted to believe their eyes. But Derek was loud and certain in holding a piece of paper, and people have been trained by long experience to trust paper over eyes. Pastor Washington looked at me. "Serena," he said carefully, "Derek does have documentation." "I know he does," I said. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. "I have documentation too." I walked to the pastor and handed him the first document. "That is a letter from Patricia Gibbs, my father's attorney of 15 years, I said. "She confirms that she never prepared, notarized, or authorized any power of attorney on behalf of Raymond Holloway. The document Derek filed with Franklin County was created without her knowledge and bears a forged notary seal." I handed him the second document. "That is a signed comparison analysis from a forensic document examiner at Ohio State's Forensic Sciences program. She examined the signature on Derek's power of attorney against 20 verified samples of my father's handwriting. Her conclusion is that the signature was not written by my father. It was traced from another document while the pen was guided by a second hand." I handed him the third page. "And that is a notarized statement from my father, signed this morning in the presence of 2 witnesses, confirming that he is of sound mind, that he never authorized any power of attorney, and that he never intended to transfer ownership of Daddy Ray's or the Weston Avenue property to anyone." Derek was breathing hard. He looked at Nicole. She was staring at the floor. The room was very still. Pastor Washington read through the document slowly. He was not a lawyer, but he was a careful man, and what he held in his hands was organized and clear and went in only one direction. He looked up at Derek. "Son," he said, his voice quieter now, with a different weight in it. "If these documents are accurate—" "They are not," Derek said, but his voice had dropped. The performance was running out of fuel. Dad walked over to where Derek was standing. He moved slowly, deliberately, and when he got close enough, he stopped and simply looked at his son for a long moment without speaking. Derek looked back at him, and in that silence, something passed between them that I understood without being able to name 40 years of a relationship, compressed into a few seconds. "You sold my shop," Dad said. "It was not a question." Derek said nothing. "You sold the place your grandfather and I built. The place I was going to leave to both of you." Derek's jaw moved. He was calculating something, looking for a door that was no longer there. "You were sick," Derek said finally. "You were not going to recover enough to run it. I was protecting the asset." My father nodded slowly. He reached out and adjusted Derek's jacket lapel the way he used to when we were children getting ready for church. It was a small, habitual gesture of a father, automatic and old. Then he dropped his hand. "Patricia is going to be filing a complaint with the county today," Dad said, "and Serena is going to explain the rest." He looked at me. "Go ahead, baby." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. I had been recording since I walked through the doors. I pressed stop. "While we were all here," I said, looking at Derek, "I had a colleague back-checking the sale of Daddy Ray's. The buyer, the Smoothie Franchise Group, has already begun renovation. They are not going to give the property back voluntarily, but the sale itself can be challenged and in some cases unwound when the seller lacked valid authority. That is a civil matter and it will take time. What will not take time, I continued, is the criminal complaint. Forging a power of attorney in Ohio is a felony. Filing a false death certificate is a felony. Using that false certificate to initiate probate proceedings and access financial accounts is fraud. And Derek, I looked at him directly, when you emptied Dad's business accounts 2 weeks ago and transferred the funds to a joint account you share with Nicole, you used interstate wire transfer to do it. That makes it federal. Nicole made a small sound and took a step away from Derek. It was instinctive, the way a person steps away from something that might fall on them. Derek turned to look at her. Nicole, he said. I did not know about the accounts, Nicole said, to no one in particular. I did not know that part. You signed the transfer authorization, I said. Nicole's eyes went to the floor. A Columbus police officer and a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit were waiting in the fellowship hall. I had called them the previous afternoon. I had sent them the documentation electronically. They had told me they would be available when needed. I nodded toward the side hallway and the detective appeared at the doorway. Pastor Washington stepped back. The congregation, which had not moved or spoken in several minutes, seemed collectively to exhale. Derek looked at the detective, then at my father, then at me. For one moment his face was completely open, stripped of the confidence and the performance and the older brother authority that had followed him his whole life. He looked scared and young and genuinely surprised that the story had ended this way. I thought you were going to fight, he said to me. I thought you would show up yelling and make a scene and they would throw you out. I know you did, I said. That is why I did not yell. The detective read Derek his rights in the side hallway while the congregation sat in their pews in a silence that felt like prayer. Nicole was escorted out separately. She cried and said Derek had told her the power of attorney was legitimate, that Dad had signed it willingly, that she had trusted him. Maybe some of that was true. Paper would sort it out. Dad sat down in the front pew next to me when it was over. The bronze urn was still on the table. Someone had straightened it back upright. Dad looked at it without expression for a moment and then shook his head slightly. Decorative metalwork, he said again, to himself, as though confirming it. I put my hand over his. He turned his palm up and held mine. The days that followed were not clean or simple. Nothing about unwinding a fraud is clean or simple. The shop presented the most complicated problem. The Cincinnati group had bought in good faith, paid a fair price, and had already invested in renovations. A challenge to the sale would mean litigation, time, and uncertainty. Patricia filed the complaint. She was thorough and methodical, and she told us honestly that reclaiming the physical property was possible but would take a year or more, and the outcome was not guaranteed. What we could move faster was the money. Derek had transferred the contents of the business accounts $46,000, the result of 32 years of careful saving, to the joint account before the shop sale had closed. When the bank received Patricia's notice of the forged power of attorney, they froze the account within 24 hours. The funds were recoverable. Franklin County had also frozen the pending sale of the Weston Avenue house, which had not yet closed. Dad still had his home. It was not everything, but it was enough. Derek was arraigned 3 weeks later. The charges were substantial forgery, fraud, filing a false government record, wire fraud. His public defender was competent and clearly overworked. Nicole cooperated with the prosecutor in exchange for a reduced charge, and her cooperation produced documents and text messages that strengthened the case significantly. There was a message from Derek sent to Nicole 3 days after Dad's stroke that said simply, "If he doesn't pull through, we get everything. If he does, we need to move fast." Dad never asked to read that message. I offered to show it to him and he shook his head. "I already know what it says," he told me. "A man like that, you know what he thinks even when he does not say it." The trial was in the spring. 4 months later, I sat in the gallery every day. My father attended the final 2 days, when the verdict was read and when the sentence was handed down. He wore the charcoal gray suit again. He sat straight in his chair and he looked at his son when the foreman read the word guilty, and he did not look away. Derek received 3 years and 4 months. Nicole received 18 months probation and community service. The judge read a statement at sentencing about the particular cruelty of financial crimes against family members, about the violation of trust that could never be fully repaired by a prison term or a restitution order, but that the law required it to try. Derek said nothing during sentencing. He had run out of things to say. Outside the courthouse, my father and I stood on the steps in the warm spring air. He was quiet for a while, the way he sometimes got when he was thinking through something he did not yet know how to say. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said finally. "What?" "The sweet potato pie recipe. Your grandmother wrote it in pencil in the back of a notebook she kept in the kitchen. I have that notebook. I have been carrying it in my coat pocket since I went into Meadowbrook because I did not want to leave it in the house." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, battered notebook with a red cover. He held it up. "He's still got this." I looked at the notebook. I looked at my father. "You want to open again?" I said. He put the notebook back in his pocket. "I talked to a woman from the neighborhood last week. She has a space on Dearborn, 3 blocks from where we were. Smaller than the old place. But a kitchen is a kitchen." I looked at him for a long moment. He was 67 years old and he had just spent 4 months recovering from a stroke and watching his son be convicted of fraud. He was standing in the courthouse parking lot in a good suit, and the look on his face was the look of a man who was already thinking about flower orders. "You are going to need a good accountant," I said. He smiled. "I already have one." 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in October, the line outside the new space on Dearborn started forming at 8 in the morning, 45 minutes before we opened the doors. I stood at the front window with a cup of coffee and watched the neighbors assemble. The regular customers from the old location who had tracked us down through church newsletters and neighborhood Facebook groups and sheer stubbornness. The new customers who had heard about the reopening and were curious. And Sister Cobb from Calvary Baptist, who was at the front of the line with a folding chair she had brought from home. Dad came in to stand beside me. He looked at the line and nodded once, a short, decisive nod, the same kind my grandfather used to give when he had made up his mind about something. "Ready?" I asked. He walked to the door and turned the sign from closed to open. The morning was exactly what you would expect: loud, warm, slightly chaotic, smelling of cinnamon and butter and brown sugar, full of people who shook Dad's hand and hugged him and ordered 2 of everything because they had missed it. I ran the register. Dad ran the kitchen. By 11 we were out of the peach cobbler and nearly out of the lemon chess and completely and totally out of the sweet potato pie. At the end of the day, after the last customer left and I was wiping down the counter and Dad was washing the last pie dish in the back, I found a letter in the stack of mail we had not opened during the rush. The return address was a federal correctional facility in southeastern Ohio. I opened it. The handwriting was Derek's, cramped and slightly unsteady on the lined paper. "Serena," the letter began. "I need money for commissary. You have no idea what it is like in here. You could put some on my account. After everything, it is the least you can do." I read it twice. I noticed that he had not asked about Dad, had not asked about the shop, had not said a single word that did not circle back to what he needed. I set the letter on the counter. I walked to the back and watched my father dry his last pie dish and set it on the rack with the careful, habitual precision of someone who has done this particular thing 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more. "Dad," I said. He turned around. "I just want you to know," I said. "I am glad you were eating scrambled eggs that morning. I am glad you were complaining about the coffee. I am glad I got to see your face when I told you." He hung his dish towel on the hook by the sink. He looked at me for a moment. "That coffee really was bad," he said. I laughed. He laughed too, the real kind, the kind that takes up the whole room. I walked over and hugged him. The way you hug someone when you have been a little afraid for a long time and the fear has finally finished. I left the letter on the counter when we locked up. I did not throw it away. I did not send money. I just left it there, a small piece of paper with nothing useful in it. And in the morning it went into the recycling with the rest of the things that no longer had a place in our story. The line was longer the next Saturday, and the one after that. By November we had hired 2 part-time counter staff and Dad was talking about adding a second oven. Sister Cobb had stopped bringing her folding chair because she had decided to arrive early enough to always get a seat inside. The sweet potato pie sold out every single week by 9:45 in the morning. Some things, it turns out, cannot be transferred by a forged signature or sold to a smoothie franchise or declared legally dead. Some things just keep rising, the same way they always have, warm and necessary, feeding whoever is hungry enough to get in line.